Closed captioning for the professors is provided in part by the Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury and wrongful death law firm in Chicago.
Unemployment remains frustratingly high. While according to a recent Times Magazine article, corporate profits are at record levels. What's going on here? Will the U.S. workforce ever return to what it once was? That's the focus of our discussion today on The Professors. Joining us to talk about the economy today and how to create jobs are Duncan Sattler, professor of economics at Wright College, Daryl Reynolds, professor of business at Trinity International University, Antonio Vasquez, Wright College professor, and David Geller, chair of the technology program at Oakton Community College. Welcome, gentlemen. The economy is a very large topic. And we've just gotten through a presidential race, which is very exciting, and the economy just comes up all the time. So how are we doing? Where are we? Is it as doom and gloom as people on one side of the aisle say, or are we on the road to recovery as the other folks say? What do you think? Don't all speak at once, by the way. I mean, you know.
We've got the physical cliff and the issues in Europe, but when you were talking about the economy in general, when they ask, are we going to get back to where we were, we moved into what I like to call the fourth economy. I remember reading a book about it. So the idea is that we had the agricultural economy, so that was one set of jobs, an industrial economy. Then we moved to the information economy in the 70s and 80s, and we're now in the creative economy, where it's models of phones and things are speeding up, the times at which turnarounds for clothing, for style, and our lives have sped up so much that entrepreneurs have to now come in and create solutions to new problems as they arise, to answer the basic questions in economics. But one of the things that I looked at recently this week was pull down the economic report to the president. And in that, you can look at how consumption and spending is done by households. And it was the last decade where we actually had more household spending on goods than services was in the 1960s. Since 1970, that ratio has gone up to where now we're spending about 2/3 of our household disposable income on services rather than goods.
Is that a good thing or bad thing for the economy?
Well, as long as those are high-skilled services, yes. But then, of course, those can be outsourced, such as telephone call centers.
Yeah.
But isn't it a little concerning that if the economy is completely based on service or disproportionately based on service, that the idea of us actually making things,
manufacturing,
yes, that we then sell across the world, has taken such a back seat that I think it leaves us vulnerable, particularly since we've had so much trouble competing on wages, not competing on wages, but the disproportionate amount paid for wages in this country versus other countries. What does that leave us if we're simply providing service?
Because it seems like goods are more sort of internationally transferable than services are. So that we would have a better position on the global economy, selling more goods than we would necessarily just selling services.
And those labor costs are starting to converge. So, for example, the Foxconn riots. Foxconn is a company that's well noted for having been the large supplier of products for Apple and HP. And they recently had riots in early September, and what was going on is they were asking for the same worker rights that actually have been sort of abandoned in the U.S., collective bargaining. Migrant workers are told one wage when they apply for the job, they get a second wage when they arrive. So they're more used to a socialist communist thought, so they're standing up. And a recent report by BCG had looked at that if you look at 2000, the average wage in China was 58 cents. Now it's a little bit over $4, and the prediction are that it will rise to between $6 and $7.
Absolutely.
So you'll see this convergence. You'll see some change in that.
We're seeing reshoring now.
Correct.
Okay, companies bringing stuff back. For that reason, high shipping cost is another reason.
Quality control issues.
And lousy quality.
Exactly.
Now you have a perspective on this, on sort of our economic challenges now, because and you want to, I think you've talked a lot about how we really compare with sort of the post-depression, or actually during the depression. Actually, I'd like for you to speak a little bit about that and where we are compared to how life was in the late
this
20s
is not
and
a
30s.
new situation. I think a lot of it parallels to what we went through in the Great Depression. There were some huge technological advances, the internal combustion engine, and particularly in the agriculture sector. A lot of farmers were put out of work because now you have tractors to do a lot of work. And we had to find places for them to work. I think we're in a similar situation now. A lot of the manufacturing has gone highly technical. So a lot of the manufacturing jobs aren't there. But we've got to find places for these folks to work. I think a lot of it is going to come through retraining them, re-educating them. In manufacturing jobs going forward, you're going to have an advanced degree to work in manufacturing.
Now, here's the deal, though, because you're right. The economy is cyclical. And so I always find this funny as a person that studies and thinks about politics all the time, how the presidents, they when the economy is bad, they get too much blame than they probably deserve, and when it's good, they get too much credit than they probably deserve, right? And so we see that the economy changes. What people are doing consistently changes. One of the things that people have been talking about recently is this whole notion of green jobs, right? And sort of the green revolution being the panacea that's going to save us and rescue us if we just get more green jobs. But I'm not necessarily sure that long term that is sort of the way to go. So for those of you all who are thinking, and maybe this question is really for you, what kinds of jobs ought we be preparing our students for going forward? What are the new industries and trends for employment?
Your basic high-tech job today requires a much higher skill level than it used to. It used to be just a maintenance guy in a plant. All he needed was a box of wrenches and he was set. Now the average maintenance guy in a plant has to understand robotics, programmable controllers, hydraulics, pneumatics, control systems. If you don't have that skill level, they won't even look at you. So the entrance level for the basic job has gone up tremendously. Unfortunately, our education system is still producing people down at the bottom who don't have the skill sets that employers are looking for, either technically or job-wise. Show up on time, does the job.
Right.
That's a big thing with manufacturers, and it's hard to get around that.
Professor Reynolds, you have a specific interest in entrepreneurship. How possibly could entrepreneurship be another solution to some of the economic challenges we're currently facing?
Well, given the fact that we've got this mismatch between what the education system is actually producing and what's required, either at the corporate level or now the manufacturing level, I think we have to start to take some steps to address the fact that we've got a portion of the population that's not going to fit in a lot of different places. An additional benefit of entrepreneurship, it starts to develop economies in some neighborhoods and in some communities that have been long forsaken. A lot of times, if we can help keep the dollars that are in those communities growing and being reinvested in those communities, the likelihood of improvement increases substantially. I think over the last probably 25 to 30 years, as a society, we've become very dependent on corporations to provide for jobs and careers and the like. And for the most part, we've abandoned entrepreneurship. There are still there are still a lot of instances where entrepreneurship is alive, but it tends to feed off some of the larger industries and the larger businesses. I think that in order for a lot of the communities to have a lot of the life breathed back into them, that some of those grassroots kind of entrepreneurship, where you're providing basic services in a lot of the not so well-to-do communities, those basic services are strongly needed.
You make a good point about that, because when you look at unemployment numbers, right, unemployment is 7.9%. But I want you to think about this when we talk about unemployment by ethnicity. So African Americans have a 14.3% unemployment rate. Hispanic Americans have a 10% unemployment rate. People of European descent have a 7%. And that obviously, there is higher unemployment based on ethnicity, obviously various communities. Education is huge when you look at you factor in education, the numbers of college graduates versus non-college graduates. So entrepreneurship may be a way, I think, as you mentioned, to sort of shrink that gap for those who are falling behind in this economy.
Well, I can tell you two things. Number one, that trend, being an economist, has been the same for 20 years. The employment among African Americans, the level of unemployment is always high, about twice Hispanics being in between. There's a new organization that's been funded by the Kauffman Foundation called the Entrepreneurship Learning Institute. And one of the things they did is try to find research by interviewing and talking to entrepreneurs. They interviewed about 700 of them. And with this Ice House model, was trying to settle the debate between can you teach entrepreneurship, or is it inherent within the individual? And what they collected in these stories is the idea these entrepreneurs learned the entrepreneurial mindset from family members.
Absolutely.
They chose an ice house model. A young man who they interviewed was African American, and he talked about how when he grew up in the South, he'd wait for a truck to come by to get up and go and do work. And he told his dad he wanted more, and he had his uncle, and he said, well, why don't you go to your uncle over at the ice house and work with him? And it was his uncle at the ice house that became his sort of like poor father, rich father, poor dad, rich dad, who taught him that entrepreneurial mindset. And so this program is being pushed out there by the Kauffman Foundation that has both people that are minorities, people with disabilities that are in the video as role models to talk about how they've been able to take and solve the basic problems within their communities. And I think that's a great tool to try and settle that debate and also bring it in within the community.
Because I personally, I'm uncomfortable with the idea that we think we're going to automatically get the economy back the way it was in the 80s and 90s. I don't know if we can return to that. So I think that's a bit of idealism that's going to go unfulfilled. So given that fact, what kind of steps do we need to take? If everybody can't go to college, either because they can't afford it or they don't have the kind of academic background to get in, what other options do we need to start employing to make sure we are shoring up our local communities so they can remain functional? Everything can't be based on the next set of corporate jobs that makes everybody, $100,000. I don't think that's realistic anymore.
Now, I want to talk about this on a macro level, the economy, because we talked very briefly about how politics influences this and how leadership influences and public policy decisions and direction, how it influences the economy. So we know that we're headed towards this fiscal cliff, right, where these tax breaks are going to end and there will be automatic spending cuts. And people are very worried that it's going to up the unemployment rate, et cetera. So with President Obama now reelected, what do we do? Are we better off now than we were 4 years ago, right? Are we? Be careful with my political cliches, right?
Compared to the Europeans,
they just popped in there.
Compared to the Europeans,
yes,
with 11.6% unemployment, if we would have taken the austerity measures, you see some of the outcomes throughout Europe: high levels of unemployment, shrinking economies. But theirs are more bun. They don't have the freedom that we have for entrepreneurship within our legal structures and within our government policies. So that's where I think a lot of the answers will come from. And that it also has to be that there's going to have to be some choices, and they're tough made. And one of the choices that usually gets cut is spending on colleges and universities. And you have to go in and cover prisons. You have to go in and cover K through 12.
Wow. We have to go in and cover prisons.
Well, it's sad to say, but that spending has gone up. Later we'll talk about Unicor, one of the larger employers in the corporations that is in prisons. They're factories with fences. But it's going to be some hard-fought choices that if you're going to want to fund the future, it's to invest in the human capital of your nation, to help that education, to be able to get those bridges. As you were talking about the level of lack of skill, in a report issued from 2008 scores, in the city of Chicago, we had 93% of students that are at below proficiency level in math, and 91%. In reading, it's 85% below proficient, and in science, 93%. How can you go in and do a high-tech job that way? And so we've got to be able to shore up some of those educational issues. So it's really that investment in human capital and allowing entrepreneurship to flourish.
We get guys come in for machining jobs, right, to learn to machine stuff, who can't read a ruler. How are you going to work when down in 10,000ths of an inch
with a micrometer
when you can't read a ruler? I mean, it's basic skills that are just not there.
And I'm pretty cynical when it comes to politics and just listening to the campaigning.
Come on.
Economics.
Are you serious? I'm offended.
Just listening to the campaigning from an economic perspective, I don't know that any one of these politicians would get more than a C in my class. I don't know if you'd agree with that. But they're very smart guys, and I understand they're talking to the general public, but we do need some strong leadership. It's time to get to work. We've got to foster business growth. We've got to
But isn't that what they're saying? Isn't that what they're saying that they want to do? I mean, if you listen to the rhetoric, right? You talk about investments. Both candidates talked about investments in infrastructure, investments in education, et cetera. President Obama promoted, Keynesian stimulus spending, and, you could argue that that was what obviously got us out of the Great Depression as well. Mitt Romney argued very famously that we should let Detroit go bankrupt and let them restructure, and that would be the better way to deal with it. So I would argue, and I'm not necessarily, I don't necessarily care, I'm not taking sides on this, but I would argue that they are talking about those things. Why would you give them a C? Or why? Are you suggesting that this is talk and maybe their particular policies?
Obviously, the government programs are essential. We have to have unemployment insurance. We have to have the fiscal stimulus. I think they made some very positive steps in that direction. But recently, imposing tariffs against China, that does not solve the problem. China's going through the same problems we are with manufacturing costs and technology. But Congress is so divided. I think it's time to kind of get everybody on the same page, and that's going to take some strong leadership from the president.
Well, a lot of the leadership had want to go after, and I do remember this out there explicitly, that Bonner and some of the Republicans did not want to go out and help Obama get reelected in 2012. So we're past that, and the idea is this fiscal cliff is got a tremendous impact on us all. We'll go through another budget deficit where we're going to raise the debt ceiling, and hopefully I've seen some talk that there's actually moderation, that Speaker Bonner has actually talked about possibly allowing some taxes to increase. So
but think about this stuff, right? So think about this. The United States government, we're approaching $16 trillion in debt now. Right. The average American is $48,000 in debt themselves. So how does an economy work effectively with so much debt? The United States credit rating has been downgraded. We know this. Right. Many Americans' credit ratings have been downgraded as well. So what do we do?
But we're not in a universe in and of itself. The rest of the world is worse off than we are. So we're still at a competitive advantage in that respect. I mean, the countries of Greece are paying 11% in some cases for their bonds. So we're relatively lucky that way.
And I've heard some arguments where it's a good time to borrow money. We should be going further in debt, repairing our infrastructure, because at 3%.
You heard it here, folks. First. Americans, we should go further in debt.
That's an extreme example, but money's cheap right now. It's a good time to borrow money.
The interest rate is 0.25% at the federal level.
Wow.
Honestly.
Well, the thing I struggle with most is I don't really know if we're hearing from Washington what it's actually going to take to make change. I think they're saying there are a lot of platitudes about what could be done. And if you just follow me, I'll make everything better. However, given the situation that we're in, and it's probably more dire, I don't want to be a doom and gloomist either, but it's more dire than I think the politicians really let us on to. In order to make substantial changes that would reduce the amount of debt that we have, that would help generate more jobs and a more robust economy, I think there's some tough choices in front of us. And if we're not ready to make those, then we'll keep living in fairyland where everything is going to be better just because somebody in office is different.
Politically, we're not, and let's just be real about that. Okay. Because what happened was, if you look at, say, Paul Ryan's budget, which was one of those really tough decision, let's cut a lot of programs, right? Politically, it was so unpopular. Mitt Romney pulled him in, and then when he was at the vice presidential debate, he basically rejected all of the principles of slashing budgets that he had promoted before. So you see that Americans don't want cuts in Social Security, they don't want cuts in Medicare, they don't really want cuts in Medicaid, and we want to spend more money on things like education, which we should. So I think you make a very good point. This is not going to be, we're not going to be out of this easy.
You can see the evidence of it in Greece, where they've got riots going back to their austerity programs. I mean, you're right. Yeah. People want to see the benefits, but it's difficult to be able to get the payments done.
That money problem is also in the school system. Yeah. If you look at all of the high schools that quit all of their tech programs, right? It used to be a metal shop and a wood shop. Why did they get rid of them? Because they cost money. What does it cost to teach an English or a history class? You need a teacher,
spending,
an overhead projector. That's about it.
Yeah. If you're lucky.
What does it take to do a metal shop or wood shop? You have to have the machines, you have to have the material, you have to have the insurance in case somebody gets hurt. Those were high expense classes. So those were the first ones they cut, and now all the industry is complaining, we don't get any technology out of the high school.
You know what? I would even go a step further than that, because while students are not necessarily graduating prepared for these technology jobs, I have read a number of studies that have shown that students are really not prepared in terms of critical thinking either.
No.
And so when you look at the new economy, the new wave of the economy that you're talking about, this sort of creativity model of invention, that sort of thing, if you cannot think outside of the box because you have not grasped the idea of critical thinking, then that is an economic problem as well.
I'm going to add a little something to that. I think it goes beyond critical thinking because there are a lot of good ideas out there. I think the thing that we're going to struggle with is executable ideas, things that you can actually take to the marketplace. I think the idea now is I can create something cheap and fast on the internet and it'll sell like wildfire and I'll be a millionaire like Zuckerberg or any of the other internet well-to-dos. I think we're going to have to get to a point where we have viable concepts that we can take to the marketplace. Now, the marketplace isn't just the internet. It's you know, it's retail, it's wholesale, it's the global marketplace. I think we can fantasize about a lot of things, but until we get hardcore executable concepts that we can take into the marketplace, it'll still be uneven.
And, you know, when we're talking about the education also, that a lot of it is in math classes and other classes I've taken is convergent thinking. It's the idea that you take a bunch of problems and add additional facts and come to one unique answer. And convergent thinking is not what's needed. It's divergent thinking. That is like one of the tests that are given in the entrepreneurship classes. How many uses do you have for a brick? Because now it's that you've got to find ways and options to be able to use this thing and sell this product and take something that you're mentally confined to by this definition that you've adopted from society without questioning it. And so it's that divergent thinking that's important.
Yeah, we need people to take those risks too, starting businesses. And I like to have business owners come into my classes and just show my students that, you know, they're regular people.
The other thing that they need to show your students is don't be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
And the schools
Just
tend
not
to,
our
failure
classes.
is a terrible thing, and yet if you talk to any entrepreneur, how many times have you failed?
We were at the Collegiate Entrepreneur Organization, their national convention, and I heard they're actually going to have a fail con, where entrepreneurs are going to come in and share their stories about failing. The new movement in entrepreneurship is fail early and fail often.
Fail fast.
Fail with less, fail fast. Don't make a mistake in a million, lose 2,000 and realize, hey, that ain't working, time
Once
to move
again,
on.
you heard it here first. Fail early and fail often.
That's right.
The concept is that you get through the mistake period or the number of mistakes you need to have made in order to build a sound foundation. The decision-making changes after you've had the appropriate either number or sizable failures so that you're on the right track.
Okay, but let me be very real and frank here about this, because as you're saying this, I'm saying, oh, that sounds wonderful. Yes, go take risks, go fail, etc. Where's the money? Right? Hasn't lending dried up? I mean, if you look at the average lending institution, the regulations after the 2011 or 2008 financial crisis the regulations are astronomical now. So where's
I think
the money?
there's really a couple ways to come at that, Ted. I think that you don't have to start with $1 million to build a business. That's why I think the concept starts more locally than it is a national or international business. The second thing is there are, you've heard of the term crowdsourcing, right? There's like crowdfunding now, where you can go into certain organizations and they will make appeals, or you can appeal directly to the general public to fund certain concepts. Now, those are small ideas, but a lot of the ideas that we're going to need going forward, I think, are small ideas that then grow into and are funded by the marketplace and what you can buy and sell, rather than having to go go in debt for $1 million to get a bank loan.
Like my students, we go to various websites, and one of the ones we do visit for peer-to-peer lending is prosper.com. And when you go to prosper.com, you can actually see people putting up their ideas. I want to borrow $10,000. The Prosper does the background check to make sure you are who you are in your credit rating, and then they'll assign a credit rating risk to you, and then you offer a certain interest rate. You can fund with as little as $25. And there are people funding their business that way.
That's fantastic.
And in the research by the Kauffman Institute that led to that, the Entrepreneurship Learning Institute, They went and interviewed a number of different people that were founders of Fortune 500 companies, and not the top ones, but that still made the Fortune 500. And most of them were not originally in that field when they started out. They were outsiders who saw that brick and said, I know a different use for it, right? That divergent thinkers. They had no background deeply within that field, but they did have some business somewhere. They ended up going in and being able to start their business with $10,000. So this misperception that it takes millions to get started was really revealed by their research, that it takes that entrepreneurial mindset, that willing to take risks, that almost outsider point of view to see that divergent thinking, to see that one object. Like the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy, if anybody saw that, they dropped that soda bottle into it, and of course as a Westerner you see the soda bottle for Coke, but the people in the middle of the Aborigines, they're using it for rolling food out, and they're using it as a hammer, and they're using it for music. And so that's the idea of divergent thinking. They can go in and apply that to many fields.
Which makes total sense. You know, I think it's interesting. We talk about we can't find money necessarily for entrepreneurs. This last election cycle, we spent $6 billion on the campaign. So, you know, maybe, you know, the candidates spent money, you know, they gave to young entrepreneurs.
You know, I think we have to reevaluate what we are spending money on. The problem with the American household debt is what we're spending money on. And we've gotten away from kind of the core things that are most important for a family to hold on to. And we spend outrageous sums of money on games and apparel that has limited value to it. I think we have to go back and reassess what it really is valuable. And if it starts at a family level, it can move easily into a more societal level. But if everything, and I've been in marketing for more years than I care to admit, but I think we've gotten out of balance about what is valuable and how much we should pursue those things. If there's $10,000 in a family that could be used for entrepreneurship, let's take a look and evaluate what's the best way of doing that, rather than taking $10 and spending it on the next television, the 3D television, rather than. I just think we're out of balance someplace, and we need some anchors.
But it's your marketing friends that are to blame for that.
I acknowledge that. I acknowledge
They make it look so good.
I acknowledge that.
So, gentlemen, yes, we are out of time. Thank you very much, and it's been a very good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're out of time now, but please join us online right now at WYCC.org as we continue the conversation. Thanks for watching The Professors. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.